Imagine, you walk into a quiet afternoon. No phone calls, no unanswered messages, no invitations to social gatherings. Just you, and you, in the gentle silence of old age. But in that moment, something awakens. A relief, a sense of fulfillment. No need to prove anything to anyone. Because at some point, you will understand, true freedom is not about how many parties you are invited to, but about being able to say no and still feel at peace. 70 is not the end, it is a new page, where you no longer live to please others, but live to listen to yourself. You begin to let go of relationships that are just a facade, repetitive conversations, social obligations that tire you out. And then, you discover, when you are alone but not lonely, that is when you are truly growing up. In this video, we will go through new and profound perspectives on friendship, loneliness, and the true value of connection after 70. Not everyone needs to stay in your life. Not everyone deserves your precious time. But you always deserve to live a full, gentle life and live according to your inner rhythm. If you are looking for an old age that is not noisy, not forced, but deep and free, click subscribe to the channel to continue writing with us the journey of living healthy, living long and living truly every day. Because this is not just old age, this is the most beautiful part of life. If you know how to live true to yourself, at 70 and beyond, you no longer need to seek validation from others as you did when you were younger. That is one of the most profound freedoms of old age, when you are no longer bound by outside eyes, expectations or judgments. While in your younger years, many friendships were built on the need to prove yourself, to create an image, or to play a role in the community. After 70, you realize that you have moved past those stages. You no longer need to be seen, acknowledged, or liked. What you need now is honesty, simplicity and peace. At this point, you no longer worry about whether you are invited to a party. You no longer need to check who is texting or liking your photos. You no longer need to strain yourself to maintain conversations that are not truly enjoyable. You begin to appreciate honesty, humility, and most importantly, you begin to live for yourself. This is illustrated most clearly by the story of Harold, 72, a former executive at a large corporation in New York. For many years, he lived in a dense network of relationships, colleagues, partners, social friends, and countless social gatherings. When he retired, he tried to stay in touch with some people, calling them, meeting for coffee. But gradually he realized that the connections between them had existed not because of genuine affinity, but because of the work they had to maintain. No one really cared about him when he no longer had a title. At first, he felt lost, but then he looked back, and a truth dawned. He had spent most of his life maintaining his image in the eyes of others, and it was time for him to just show up as himself. He gave up the forced maintenance of superficial relationships and returned to the things that made him truly happy, playing the piano, gardening, taking morning walks, and occasionally calling his college best friend, whom he had not spoken to for a long time but still felt familiar. From the perspective of developmental psychologists, this is the stage when older people enter the ego integrity stage. According to Erik Erikson's model of development, this is when people look back on their lives, evaluate their core values, and tend to live closer to their true nature. They no longer crave acceptance like young people, but rather desire inner peace and consistency between their actions and personal beliefs. Researchers also believe that as people pass 70, their social functioning naturally declines, not because they are lonelier, but because they begin to select their relationships. Performative, superficial, or image-maintaining relationships are automatically eliminated, to make room for truly deep connections or sometimes connections with oneself. This doesn't mean you don't need friends. It means you don't need friends that come from being forced. You start to appreciate the moments when you're alone, the peace you find in reading a book, going for a walk without anyone, or drinking tea in silence. You choose those who make you feel relieved after meeting them, rather than feeling tired because you have to play a social role. And that's when you realize, old age friendships don't need quantity, don't need to be ostentatious, just quality, sincere, and without expectations. A great benefit of letting go of the need to prove yourself is that you will have a lot more mental energy to do things that are truly meaningful to you. You can relearn an art, write a memoir, write poetry, learn photography, or simply watch the trees change leaves each season. These seemingly small things are how you connect deeply with the world, in a genuine and unadorned way. When you no longer need validation from others, you are no longer dominated by feelings of disappointment, jealousy, or pressure when comparing yourself to others. You live enough, live truly, and live each moment fully without anyone witnessing. Age 70 plus is not a period of closure, but a period of opening a new lifestyle, a gentle, conscious lifestyle that does not need to follow social norms. And that is not just liberation, but a worthy reward for a lifetime of effort to live and love. If you are entering this stage, remember, you do not need to belong to any social circle to feel valuable. You are yourself. That is enough. And if there is someone who is destined to stay with you, those will be the most beautiful connections, not out of need, but out of sincerity. As we age, we begin to realize that silence is no longer a fear, but a precious gift. In our younger years, we are often caught up in the hustle and bustle of life, always trying to maintain our presence in meetings, long conversations, or texting back and forth just to stay connected. But when we reach the age of 70 and beyond, the natural pace of life slows down, and the need to be quiet begins to outweigh the need to be present. Silence is no longer as scary as before. On the contrary, it brings a sense of safety, stability, and allows the mind to truly rest. It is in the absence of noise that people can listen to their true inner voice, which was previously always overshadowed by the voices of others. Many friendships, though seemingly close, come with hidden, unnamed responsibilities. You have to reply to messages promptly to avoid being seen as cold. You have to pick up the phone when you're not ready to talk. You have to attend gatherings when you're no longer interested. Or you have to maintain the same conversations over and over again, just to avoid feeling forgotten. These things, though small, accumulate over time to create psychological pressure that makes older people easily fall into a state of fatigue, without knowing the cause. Margaret, 74. Living in Portland, is a clear example. She used to have a close group of friends who called regularly, had coffee dates, celebrated birthdays, and had monthly get-togethers. But over time, she began to notice that those conversations no longer excited her as before. People kept telling the same old stories. Some just complained about their illnesses. Others were engrossed in talking about their children and grandchildren, without really listening. She began to feel like the gatherings were more of a duty than a joy. And then one day she asked herself, why do I continue when I'm no longer happy with them? She began to change. She allowed herself to say no to invitations that she was no longer interested in. She stopped answering the phone immediately if she needed time for herself. Instead of spending time on repetitive conversations, she chose to read, take walks, garden, and learn calligraphy. She realized that being alone did not mean being lonely, it meant resting, restoring the mind, living in accordance with one's own rhythm. From a geriatric psychology perspective, this was a positive and completely natural change. As the brain ages, it also tends to filter out unnecessary stimuli. This makes older people no longer interested in superficial social conversations, but want to go deeper, want relationships that are truly meaningful, or if not, the choice of being alone will always be better than a meaningless crowd. Many studies on social behavior in the elderly have shown that the level of satisfaction with life of the elderly is not directly proportional to the number of social relationships they have, but depends on the quality of the connections, and also their ability to feel comfortable being alone. A person can live very happily with only 1-2 real relationships, or even without regular social relationships, as long as they have a rich inner life. Moreover, being alone also helps increase self-awareness, helping the elderly restore psychological energy, which is easily depleted when having to socialize too often. Being quiet also helps increase concentration, improve memory, reduce stress, improve blood pressure, and improve sleep quality. Most importantly, quiet helps older people be more proactive in managing their time and emotions. When they are not caught up in social schedules, they can choose when and how to communicate that suits their energy. They no longer have to put up with the same old stories, and do not have to try to maintain a friendship just because they are afraid of being seen as cold. They learn to set healthy boundaries, and that is not selfish, but loving themselves. And when they have enough time alone, if they have the opportunity to meet an old friend with a real connection, they will come together with sincerity, not out of social obligation. Old age is not the time to fill your life with noisy conversations, it is the time to filter, to listen, to rest and restore. There is nothing wrong with feeling tired of old connections. There is nothing wrong with choosing to be alone instead of going to a party. And it's true that you find peace in silence, because it's a sign that you're getting to know your true needs. Sometimes, a quiet afternoon with a cup of tea and a good book can be more nourishing than hours of meaningless conversation. And you, and no one else, deserve that choice. Not everyone deserves to be called a friend. That statement may sound cold, but it becomes a clear truth when we reach the age of 70 and beyond. At this stage, you have spent decades living, working, cultivating, giving, and also many times being disappointed and frustrated by relationships that you once thought were sincere. When we were young, we often easily called someone a friend, just because we had a few conversations that matched our tastes, went out together a few times, or simply had the same working environment. But as we age, we begin to look back and ask ourselves, does this relationship really bring me spiritual support? Or am I the one maintaining it one-sidedly? The answer often makes us sigh. Mr. William, 78 years old, used to have a long list of friends who he knew from many stages of his life. Old classmates, old colleagues, old neighbors, weekend groups. He was always the one who took the initiative to keep in touch, often calling to ask how they were, suggesting meetings, sending birthday gifts on the right day. But over time, he began to realize an unacceptable reality: if he did not contact them first, the other side was almost silent. The messages he sent sometimes received only superficial responses. Some people were always busy. Some promised to meet and then forgot. Some only came to him when they needed help. The feeling of being forgotten, not appreciated, even though not expressed, left a deep sadness. Mr. William used to torment himself. Did I do something wrong? But after many times of questioning himself, he realized he was not wrong. He is just holding on to relationships that are no longer reciprocal, connections that one party has long since stopped, and he keeps holding on to because he is used to it, because he is afraid of losing it, because he regrets it. From the perspective of social psychologists, this is the stage when people go through a natural relationship purge. In middle and old age, the brain begins to prioritize emotional stability and psychological safety, so we become more sensitive to relationships that drain energy. Connections that are forced, one-sided, or have many unmet expectations will cause fatigue, sadness, and even lead to feelings of being taken advantage of. According to a study published in the journal Psychology and Aging, older people tend to gradually reduce the number of friends, but increase the level of satisfaction with the remaining relationships, because they become more selective, keeping the people who are truly important and letting go of the rest. Letting go of relationships that no longer worked for him was not selfish, but healthy. As William began to realize this, he gradually stopped trying to reach out to people who didn't actively stay in touch. At first, he felt empty. But then, to his surprise, he realized that the loss didn't make him sad for long. On the contrary, he felt relieved, as if he had just unloaded a heavy backpack. He used the time to talk to people who were really close to him, like his brother who lived a few states away, but called every weekend. He also had more time to take care of himself, go for walks, write in his journal, and do things that made him happy without feeling like he had to keep the relationship going. In the picture of aging, quality is more important than quantity. A friend who listens is worth more than 10 who only come when needed. A sincere conversation is more valuable than a series of soulless social messages. And sometimes, a quiet afternoon where you talk to yourself is more profound than a meeting full of forced laughter. The choice to withdraw from old connections that are no longer suitable is not because you are withdrawing, but because you are growing emotionally. You begin to realize, not everyone is in your life to stay. There are people who just come to a stage, teach you a lesson, then let them go gently. And most importantly, when you stop giving into a place that no longer responds, you open up space, not only to welcome new, healthier connections, but also to return to take care of yourself. You can rediscover old joys, learn new things, enjoy every moment without worrying about who texts, who dates, who remembers you. You remember yourself first, and that's what you deserve most. Finally, remember, true friendships don't need to be maintained too much. If a relationship requires you to strain yourself to survive, it's probably not a friendship anymore. As you get older, your heart deserves to be surrounded by people who make you feel light, who make you feel like yourself, and who never doubt your worth in their eyes. And if that means having fewer friends, but really, that's the best gift you can give yourself for the rest of your life. After 70, every hour becomes a precious asset, not only because the time left is limited, but because you begin to deeply understand that nothing is worth trading for true peace and joy. At this stage of life, you no longer have to follow a tight schedule, no longer feel the need to be everywhere, and no longer place great importance on pleasing others. Instead, you begin to appreciate every moment. A quiet morning, a good book, a leisurely walk, or simply an undisturbed afternoon. Time becomes a deliberate choice, not something to be filled with social interactions that do not bring real spiritual value. Richard, 81, used to be a professional socializer. His calendar was packed with coffee dates, retirement groups, monthly get-togethers, birthdays, and anniversaries, all regular but repetitive. At first, he was happy to stay connected, to be remembered, to be invited to parties. But over time, he began to feel exhausted. The conversations revolved around the same old topics. The complaints about illness, the comparisons of children, the forced laughter. What bothered him most was that after each meeting, he didn't feel happier, he felt drained of energy, emotionally drained, and time taken without return. He began to ask himself, is this how I want to live the rest of my life? And so he decided to change. He refused to schedule regular meetings. He politely excused himself from chat groups that he no longer felt connected to. Instead of crowding into crowded cafes to maintain relationships, he spends his mornings reading history books that he used to miss. He learned to use a computer to access online philosophy lectures, something he dreamed of when he was working. In the afternoon, he leisurely walks around the park near his house, sometimes sitting and watching people passing by, giving his mind a real rest. The result? He finds himself living more authentically, happier, and each day is meaningful. From the perspective of gerontologists and developmental psychologists, redefining how to use time after age 70 is one of the most important factors in helping older people maintain mental health and a sense of initiative in life. Time is no longer just a unit to count years, but becomes the material to build true joy. Relationships that no longer provide empathy, trust, and positive energy should be minimized. Making room for nurturing activities, learning, creativity, relaxation, and connecting with oneself. Studies have shown that older adults who are selective about their activities and prioritize personal experiences tend to have higher levels of life satisfaction, less depression, and longer lives than those who are caught up in a cycle of musts and musts to avoid loneliness. A little spoken truth is, being in a crowd is not always a sign of happiness. After 70, you have the right, and in fact should, choose your own pace of life. Not rushing. Not jostling at parties just to not be forgotten. Your presence is no longer an obligation, but a voluntary agreement that comes from the heart. You don't have to appear everywhere to prove that you still fit in. You just need to appear where you feel happy, feel light, feel like yourself. When you start asking the question, does this really make me happy? It means that you have gone a long way on the journey of emotional maturity. You don't need to do something to be present, but instead choose to be present for yourself, in the best quality way. You don't need to stay in touch with someone just because you have known them for a long time. If that relationship only drains you, you can choose a book over a noisy gathering. You can choose quiet time with your loved ones over politeness in a group chat with a different person. And you have every right to say no, not out of bad faith, but because you are protecting the most precious part of your remaining years, the time to live according to your personal values. In short, after 70, you don't need as much as before, but you need the right thing. Not too many friends, just the real you. Not too many activities, just experiences that bring you joy. Not chasing after anyone, just being true to yourself. When you realize that every hour of life is an asset, you will start to spend it more wisely, not wastefully, not reluctantly, not in accordance with other people's expectations. You live true to yourself, and that is the best way to live at any age. Many people spend their lives believing that happiness comes from having a large social circle, that you are truly living a full life only when you have many friends around you. However, as you approach your 70s, the truth begins to emerge, and what many people have misunderstood begins to be adjusted. You don't need a lot of people around you to feel fulfilled. The most lasting, powerful, and profound companionship in your later years doesn't come from anyone else. It comes from within. The ability to feel at peace when you are alone. The ability to enjoy silence without feeling empty. That is the sign of true emotional maturity and inner happiness. Mrs. Eleanor 76 is a clear example of this important transition. All her life, she has been an active, extroverted person, always proactive in groups of friends, group activities, and seasonal gatherings. She often called, planned meetings, sent messages to ask about people. But after her husband passed away, and her children grew up and moved to another city, she began to feel empty. Although she had many relationships around her, she still felt lacking, still trying to find people to talk to fill the feeling of loneliness. However, what surprised her was that the more she talked, the more often she met, the more tired she felt. There were calls that no longer brought joy, gatherings that only revolved around illness, comparing children or repeating old stories. Although she still smiled and talked on the outside, inside, Eleanor felt emptier than ever. One day, she decided to try something she had always avoided, spending time completely alone. She put her phone on silent mode, went to the park alone, sat under the shade of a tree reading the book she had left unfinished. She started writing a diary every morning, not letting social media updates control her emotions. Instead of calling someone just because she was afraid of being alone, she made tea, put on some soft music, and let herself settle down. The first week, she felt strange. The second week, she felt comfortable. And by the third week, she suddenly realized, for the first time in years, she felt truly at peace. She didn't need anyone else to feel alive. From the perspective of a geriatric psychologist, this is a completely natural and very important process in human inner development. As we age, the brain gradually shifts its focus from social interaction to inner reflection. This doesn't mean that older people hate connection, it just means that they start to seek deeper values. No longer being attracted by the quantity of people around them, but more interested in the quality of the emotions inside. Research from Harvard also shows that the ability to feel happy when alone is a strong predictor of life satisfaction in old age. And interestingly, when people are comfortable enough with themselves, they also tend to attract healthier, more sincere relationships. Many people confuse being alone with lonely, but in fact, these two concepts are completely different. Loneliness is a feeling of absence, of emptiness, of a longing for sharing without being reciprocated. But being alone, when it comes from the initiative, is a form of nurturing. When you are alone and feel enough, feel at peace, it means you have built a strong relationship with yourself. You are your own best friend, the one who understands your emotions, and also the one who knows how to take care of your mind with kindness. One of the biggest benefits of being comfortable enough with being alone is that you no longer settle for half-hearted relationships. You no longer have to maintain friendships just to be polite. You no longer have to listen to whining calls. You no longer have to sit through meetings where you feel out of place. You are selective. You know your limits. And most importantly, you no longer fear being alone. On the contrary, you begin to discover that in silence, you hear your own voice. You remember the things that used to make you happy. Discover new things that make you curious. And you begin to become your own most stable companion, someone who always understands, always is patient, and never leaves you. From that moment on, other relationships, if they come, will come naturally. Because when you are true to yourself, you also attract people with similar energy. People who come to share, not to fill, to accompany, not to possess, come to listen, not to take up space. You no longer need to search, because fullness has already started from within you. And if there is a message for those over 70 who are still confused between should keep friends or let go, should communicate, or choose to be alone, perhaps it is, start with yourself. When you truly love yourself, you will know clearly who should stay in your life, and who can be let go gently, without regret. Because sometimes, what you need most is not someone to accompany you, but to dare to walk a path alone, so that you will meet yourself again, in the most beautiful and complete way. Letting go of friendships that no longer serve you is not a negative act, but a conscious decision that will help you live a simpler, lighter, and truly happier life. At the age of 70 and beyond, when you have gone through enough ups and downs in life, experienced loss, and grown from both success and failure, you begin to realize that time, energy, and peace of mind are assets that cannot be wasted. Continuing to maintain old relationships that no longer bring joy, or even make you tired, is no longer a politeness, but an unnecessary drain. James, 79, is a man who used to take keeping in touch with old friends very seriously. Even though he is retired, he still tries to make regular phone calls, attend class reunions, friends' birthdays, respond to all messages, and sometimes even reluctantly go see people he no longer feels close to. He believed that if he did not take the initiative, the relationship would die, and he was afraid of losing the past. But then, after a while, he began to feel exhausted. The meetings became more and more repetitive. The conversations became awkward, and at times he even wondered who he was maintaining this for them, or for his own image in the past. The answer surprised him. He was living for a past that no longer fit the present. From a behavioral psychology perspective, this is a natural process that many older people experience, but do not dare to name. It is the process of emotional transformation from attachment to selection. When young, people tend to keep as many relationships as possible, because they think that the number of friends reflects social value. But when entering old age, the brain and soul begin to prioritize emotional security, tranquility, and deep, unforced relationships. Holding on to old friendships that are no longer relevant to the present will make people feel out of sync, leading to a hidden inner conflict, wanting to maintain them, but also feeling exhausted. Mr. James then made an important decision. He stopped calling people who he only talked to out of habit. He stopped accepting meetings that he didn't really look forward to. At first, he felt a little empty, but not long after, he discovered something precious. When he let go of old relationships, he opened up new space for himself. The time he used to spend on keeping the rules was invested in his health. He started walking every morning, learning deep breathing exercises. He returned to his hobby of nature, photography, something he used to love but had missed in the hustle and bustle of work and socializing. He felt clearer-minded, more stable emotionally, and his sleep also improved significantly. Most importantly, he no longer feels left behind, but instead, feels I am finally living my life. From the perspective of geriatric and mental health experts, knowing how to let go of relationships that no longer have positive value is one of the important skills that help the elderly maintain mental health and avoid the risk of depression. Many elderly people fall into a feeling of loneliness, not because there is no one around, but because they continue to maintain one-sided relationships, causing themselves to always have to struggle to maintain a harmonious appearance that gradually erodes inner joy and makes people no longer have enough energy for their favorite activities. It should also be made clear, letting go does not mean isolation. Letting go does not mean closing the door to the world. On the contrary, letting go is opening up a new living space where you can live true to your own values. When you are no longer bound by social expectations, by the fear of displeasing others, you will have time to rediscover yourself, what you want, what you need, what makes you happy. And once you live true to that, the remaining relationships, no matter how few, will become deeper and more genuine. You will attract people who truly understand and appreciate you, because you are not in their lives to please, but to share values. And if you are having difficulty letting go, ask yourself, does this relationship still make me happy? Do I still feel comfortable being myself with this person? Or am I holding back because I am afraid of losing my image? If the answer is no, then perhaps you owe yourself a release. Old age is not the time to be burdened with the past. Old age is the time to live truly, live lightly, and live sufficiently. And sometimes, the best thing you can do for yourself is to let go of what no longer belongs to you, to free your mind, and let life open up to new things, right time, right person, right value. At 70 and beyond, you are no longer the same version of yourself that you were when you were young. Questions like who am I? How should I live? Am I doing the right thing? No longer torment you like before, because by now, you have lived long enough to understand what makes you happy, what makes you tired, who makes you feel at peace, and who makes you feel like you have to put on a front to fit in. When you were young, you struggled between social roles, trying to fit in, trying to make a good impression, trying to please everyone. But when you pass 70, you no longer need to try, you no longer need to be accepted by others, because you have learned to accept yourself. And that is the deepest form of freedom. The freedom to live true to your own values without having to compare, without having to belong to a group to feel valuable. At this stage of life, you begin to be more honest with yourself. Social relationships are no longer as attractive as before. Maintaining contact just to not be cold gradually becomes a burden. Friends who are no longer on the same wavelength, that is, no longer share the same values, no longer talk to make you feel connected, are gradually put aside by you. Not because you hate them, but because you no longer want to compromise yourself just to maintain a meaningless social relationship. You don't need to be in a conversation that you are not interested in. You don't need to attend a meeting just to be polite. You don't need to nod in agreement with things you don't believe in. And you no longer feel guilty about saying no to something that doesn't suit you. Because you understand, if you don't live true to yourself, no one else can live for you. The story of Mrs. Susan 73 is a vivid illustration. She used to be a high school teacher, loved by many colleagues and students. After retiring, she was still invited to class reunions, parties, and joined the Alumni Association. At first, she still regularly participated in these activities because she thought it was a way to stay connected and maintain her image. But then, she realized that after each meeting, she felt exhausted. The conversations no longer excited her. The repetitive stories, the comparisons about children, grandchildren, illnesses, houses, made her feel lost. She began to withdraw gently. She refused a few appointments to spend time on the things she truly loved, reading history books, writing short stories, taking care of the small garden behind the house. When someone asked why she didn't socialize anymore, she just smiled and said, "At this age, I don't need anyone to tell me how to live. I've already lived. And I choose to spend the rest of my life living my true self." From the perspective of developmental psychologists, the period after 70 years old is considered the time when people enter the ego unification stage, a concept in Erik Erikson's theory of psychological development. This is the time when people look back on life with an accepting, filtering and selective mindset. They no longer seek to define themselves from the outside, but turn inward to live more fully with themselves. People who achieve this state often have great inner peace, are less influenced by the judgment of others, and often have superior mental health than those who are still caught up in the need to fit in. Unfortunately, many people still try to maintain external connections to avoid the feeling of being left behind. They continue to participate in activities that are no longer meaningful, maintain relationships that are no longer attached, and live in a state of having it or not having it, but that only drains their energy. On the contrary, when you are brave enough to let go of things that no longer suit you, you will find life becomes much simpler, neater, and more pleasant. You will have more time to live with the things that make you happy: a quiet morning with a cup of tea, a favorite song, an old book, a walk in the park without anyone to accompany you. And in that simplicity, you begin to reconnect with yourself, the most trustworthy, most steadfast, and most loyal friend you have. When you understand yourself well enough, you will also know how to nourish yourself with kindness, eat the foods you like, say the things you believe in, be with people who make you feel at ease. You no longer live according to anyone's expectations, you live according to your own heartbeat, breathing and life rhythm. Old age, therefore, is not the end, but the beginning of a journey of living deeper, more sincere, and more freely than ever. When you stop trying to fit in with others, you start fitting in with yourself. And that is the greatest gift that 70 gives to those who are brave enough to be true to themselves. Young people often think that the more friends they have, the more fun they have. Crowded gatherings, long lists of names in the phone, group photos are always considered proof of a rich, vibrant social life. But when you get old, you will begin to realize a simple but profound truth. You don't need many people around you to feel fulfilled. Just one person who understands you sometimes is more than enough to replace the whole crowd. It could be an old friend who always remembers your birthday, even though you don't see them often. A grandchild who often sits and listens to you tell old stories without rushing. Or sometimes it's you, the most persistent companion in every moment. From happy days to quiet hours. At the age of 70 and above, you have gone through enough stumbles, have had people come and go, have witnessed the change of relationships over time. And what you gradually learn is that value lies in depth, not quantity. A heart-to-heart conversation between two people can be more emotional and healing than hours of small talk at a crowded party. It's the presence of someone, no need for long words, no need for loud noises, that connects people at the deepest level. Helen, 75, used to be a social butterfly. She had dozens of friendships during her years as a nurse, co-workers, neighbors, book club friends, senior yoga groups. She was always the one who remembered birthdays, connected groups, and organized regular get-togethers. But then, after her husband died and she underwent major surgery, she realized that what warmed her heart the most wasn't the formal greetings in a large group chat, but a brief phone call from a high school friend just asking one simple question: "Are you okay?" It was a voice that made her cry, not because she was sad, but because she felt the genuineness of the connection. From a relationship psychology perspective, this is not surprising. Modern research on happiness in old age consistently shows that the number of social connections is not closely related to life satisfaction, but the quality of connections is. A famous Harvard study, which followed the lives of more than 700 people for more than 80 years, found that those who felt happier, healthier, and lived longer had at least one or two really close relationships, not necessarily many, just real ones. The key here is sincerity, non-judgment, and the ability to listen. Older people don't need more friends to fill the void. They need real friends who are there when things are not going well, when they need to be heard, not lectured, when they need a sympathetic look, not hasty advice. And if no one is around, that's okay. You can be that person for yourself. The ability to comfort yourself, to listen to yourself, to be your companion is a valuable skill, and luckily, old age is the perfect time to cultivate it. You don't have to stay in touch with 20 people every month. You don't have to feel guilty about leaving chat groups that no longer bring you joy. You don't have to try to maintain relationships that have lost their authenticity just because of a history of closeness. Release yourself from the pressure to maintain an image. You deserve to choose the people who stay with you naturally, not forced. And the magic is, when you start to let go of the noise, you'll realize that the people who truly connect with you, without you having to hold on, they stay. They're the ones who call you not out of politeness, but because they really miss you. They're the ones who ask how you're doing, not just how are you, and then hang up. They may not be around often, but they're always there. And you will also find sometimes a sympathetic look in the park, a friendly nod from a neighbor is enough to warm an afternoon. In the end, what is precious is not the number of calls you have in your contact list, but the one call you really want to hear. Not the number of people you can invite to dinner, but the person you can sit next to without saying anything and still feel full. Not the crowd that comes to celebrate your birthday, but the quiet eyes of the only person who always remembers that day as the day you were born. Old age teaches us, true connection does not come from trying, it comes from being genuine. When you live in your own rhythm, like-minded people will come to you. And when you live deeply enough with yourself, you will no longer worry about the absence of anyone, because the greatest, strongest, and warmest presence is always right inside you. This video does not promote isolation, nor does it encourage seniors to withdraw from the world. Instead, the message we want to share is clear and humane. Let go of social relationships that are only formal, connections that you maintain out of habit, politeness, or fear of being judged, but no longer bring joy or harmony. In your old age, you no longer have to force yourself to please anyone. This is the time when you are allowed to live truly, live lightly, and live in accordance with your inner emotional rhythm. When you start living without pressure, without forcing yourself, knowing how to choose relationships, and knowing how to pay attention to yourself, you will feel more clearly the peace and happiness in each passing day. You will no longer care about the number of people around you, but begin to appreciate the quality of deep connections, or simply a genuine connection with yourself. Freedom, peace and fulfillment come from within. That is the wonderful gift that old age brings. When you are brave enough to let go of things that are no longer suitable. If this video makes you feel sympathetic, gives you positive energy, or helps you look at old age from a gentler and deeper perspective, don't hesitate to like, leave a comment sharing your feelings, and subscribe to the channel to continue accompanying us on the journey of living healthy, living long and living truly, because you deserve a memorable old age